We're going to read a piece in the Taz that we began last time we got together. He writes, Yesh chiluk b'davar. He's trying to figure out what happens if he recites Kiddush on Mayim instead of Yayin. And he makes the following distinction. Im hoya b'shas ha-Kiddush Yayin al shulchan or al savsol etzlo. If he has another cup besides the cup of water that he made Kiddush on, he's got a cup of yayin that's right there on his table or next door on his safsol, which is, I guess, a kind of a couch. Muchan lishtos. As vaday ain't tzarich lo lebar priyagofen v'lo lekiddush shenis. El yishteh hamuchan lefanav. And he goes ahead and he quotes a Ramah in Hilchas Birchas HaPeros, in Shulchan Aruch Simon Reish Tes. And the Ramah there quotes an earlier tshuva of the Maharil, so we're dating back like 600 years. And there the Ramah, in the name of the Maharil, writes that in a case where you had in mind to make a bracha on yayin, but instead you made a bracha on mayim, then since the yayin is there in close proximity, then he doesn't have to make another bracha, he could just drink the wine. And the Taz adds a little bit of a flavor to it, a little bit of an explanation. He writes, "Havi ki ilu kiddush al yayin hahu." It's as if he had recited Kiddush on that wine. Ubazeh amrinon, and in this case we apply a principle which comes from another sugya in Shas called Kule Navge Dibur Chasa Ninhu. And we'll have to see what that means. Kain Nira Lianias Daiti Nochon Bozeh. That's the end of the quote from the Taz. So let's just summarize. The Taz is saying that the bottom line, halacha l'maisa, as far as a person who made Kiddush on wine, on yayin, on on mayim instead of yayin, depends upon whether or not he has in close proximity a cup of wine, munach lefanov. If he has to bring wine from somewhere else, and all he had in front of him at the time that he recited Kiddush was just a kos of mayim, then he's going to have to repeat Kiddush again and a bar priyagofen when they bring him the wine. But if, on the other hand, quoting the Ramah in the name of the Chuvas Maharil, he has a cup of yayin right there, munach al shulchan, then we don't require neither a new bar priyagofen nor a new birchas hakidush, Baruch Hashem HaKadosh Shabbos. And the reasoning behind that is havi ki'ilu kiddush al yayin. It's as if he had made Kiddush on the wine that was right there in front of him. So he made a mistake, and he made Kiddush al hamayim, but really his Kiddush was on the yayin, which is munach lefanov. And that includes both the bar priyagofen and the birchas hakiddush. And then the Taz, to top it off, he adds another sugya here, which is right now Chinese to us, and he says the birchasa navge de birchasa ninhu, whatever that means. Now, before we try to analyze this Taz, I want to quote to you the language of the Shulchan Aruch. And even if we weren't learning the laws of Kiddush, this Shulchan Aruch is very relevant, and it's commonplace. The Shulchan Aruch is in Siman Reish Vav, Seif Vav, in the laws of Birchas HaPeiros. Natal biyado pri, he took into his hand a fruit, li ochlo, his intention was to eat that fruit, ubirech olav, and on this fruit that he's holding in his hand, he made a bar priya eitz, v'nafal biyado, and it dropped out of his hands. Now again, if he could pick it up immediately, that's one thing. But let's say it was nevad, it was lost. It was that rolling fruit that just rolled away, or maybe it got, disgusting as it rolled through the ground, the dust, whatever it might be. Tzarich lachzor ulevarech. He has to again recite the bracha. And the Shulchan Aruch adds the following: V'afal pisha hayomi oso hamin lefanav. Even if he has other fruits of the same exact category in front of him, kishabirech ala rishon. So imagine, he's got a cluster of grapes in front of him. He picks up one grape, wants to eat the grape, makes a bracha bar priya eitz, and then before he gets a chance to eat it, the grape gets lost, disappears into thin air. The Mechaber paskins, he's going to have to make a new bracha, despite the fact that he had a cluster of grapes in front of him on the table. And my question to you is, how then can the Taz justify the case where he made Kiddush al Hamayim? So it means he held in his hands the kos Kiddush, thinking that it had wine in it, but it really had mayim in it. And now, says the Taz, because he has a cup of wine right there on the table, he can drink from that kos. He does not require neither a bori priya gofen nor birchas hakiddush. And ostensibly, the case of the Taz is identical with the case of the Shulchan Aruch. And the Shulchan Aruch paskins that even though he has other fruits on the table from the same min, he needs another bracha, because he had grabbed one particular fruit. The bracha was chal on that fruit, and that's where the bracha lands. I mean, there's another halacha that once the bracha is chal on that fruit, he doesn't have to make another bracha on the other fruit. But in this case, the Mechaber paskins, he has to make a... Now again, it's possible that the Taz doesn't accept the Shulchan Aruch, because if you keep it in mind, the Taz was quoting a Ramah, and it could possibly be that the Ramah might disagree with the Shulchan Aruch, and the Taz chose to paskin like the Ramah. But I find that a little bit strange that the Taz doesn't even blink and completely ignores what it says explicitly in Shulchan Aruch. And by the way, in Shulchan Aruch, in Reish Vav, it doesn't seem like anyone rejects the Shulchan Aruch. It's written there what we call mistama, and he's got to make another bracha. And it's all because what? He grabbed onto one fruit in his hand. Here too, in the case of the Taz, he grabbed on to the kos mayim, and then he realized, wait a minute, my bracha is not valid here. I need to take a kos yayin. Joe?
Is the fact that the fruit in this situation disappeared not a major factor in what we're saying? In other words, if he had made the bracha on one fruit and changed his mind, put it down, and took another one of the same min, would he have to make another bracha in that situation or no?
What I'm suggesting is that if he grabs onto a fruit, or in our case of the Taz, he grabbed onto kos mayim,
Yeah, but I'm
his
saying,
bracha is now chal on that mayim.
but the when it's talking about the fruit, it says that fruit it disappears. It doesn't say that he put it down and took another one. It says that that particular fruit disappeared. And I'm asking if he just puts it down, would he say the same thing?
Again, I don't think, Joe, that the word disappear, maybe I'm guilty for using that word. I don't think that's at all what we're talking about over here. What we're talking about is that he never ate that fruit which he had grabbed and made a bracha on. And I'm just explaining the logic of it is that the bracha was related in Lumdish
I
terms, we call
understand,
it
but
chal, on that fruit. Meaning when you make a bracha on a fruit that is in your hand, the bracha is now limited to that fruit because it's in your hand. So you made the
I
bracha on that which is in your hand.
I,
If
und-
you make a bracha on mayim, then the bracha is on the mayim. It can't be on
I
anything else.
yeah, I understand, but I'm just asking. The Mechaber doesn't say that he just put the fruit down. It said that something happened to it most, that it would disappear. He said that it's no longer, he cannot use that vehicle anymore. I'm just asking, is that why didn't it say that he just took it down, put it down, and took another fruit? That's what I'm asking.
Well, again, I don't think it's a common situation where he put down that fruit and took another fruit. It could be he would do such a thing, maybe because he realized that, oh, I have a better fruit than the first one. That's not that could happen. But the classic case is where he dropped the fruit, and this has happened to me personally many, many times. That although I grabbed something at the end, again, I use the word it disappeared, but that's not the point.
I would say a little bit different nafkamina. I would say in the case of the fruit, the bracha actually could be chal on that fruit. In other words, it was the right bracha for that fruit, and the bracha was takachal on it, and then it disappeared. So now you have to make another bracha. You're going to take another fruit. In the case of mayim, the bracha could never be chal on the mayim. Really, you couldn't make a priyagofen on the mayim. So therefore, it's like automatically the bracha moves to the yayin that's there in place because that it could never have been chal on the mayim in the first place. So his
Right.
das would definitely be that it should move.
Let me try to reiterate what Bobby is saying over here. It's all a question of where his das is. In the case of the fruit, his das was on that fruit. The only mistake here is in the fact that the fruit dropped on the floor. But there's no question that his das was on that fruit. In the case of the mayim, his das was not on the mayim. He made a mistake and he grabbed the mayim, but his das was on the yayin. So that when does the mechaber paskin that your bracha is completely invalid? That's when you had a das on one particular object, and that object was never eaten. But if you had das on another object, then the whole thing was a tos from the beginning, mi'ikaro. And in effect, his intention, his das, was to make the bracha on the yayin. So it could very well be, as Bobby points out very well, that there's no head-on collision here between the Taz and the Shulchan Aruch. The Taz could be reconciled with the Shulchan Aruch, as we indicated. Now, let's take the words of the Taz as they apply to another scenario, and that's nishpach. The Taz makes an analogy between Kiddush alamayim and nishpach because Kiddush alayayin. So now the scenario is that he has a cup of wine in front of him. He grabbed that cup of wine, but before he got an opportunity to drink from the wine spilled. Now, in that case, the Taz claims that he doesn't need a new Kiddush if he can bring another cup of wine immediately. When I say immediately, I mean without what's called Hesech Hadas. And then the Kiddush that he recited on the first cup of Yain, that was Nishpach, is now Chal on the second kos of Yain, which he brought in as a replacement for the first kos of Yain. You know, it's like if you have a pitcher and there's another pitcher in the bullpen, so if the first pitcher fails, and only the coach will determine that, then you bring in a second pitcher from the bullpen to replace the first pitcher. But if I understand the Taz correctly, the analogy between Mayim and Nishpach goes only so far. That just like in the case of Mayim, if he has Yayin Munach Lefanav, he doesn't have to repeat Kiddush. So too in the case of Yayin V'Nishpach, if he can bring in another kos of Yayin, because it's here on the spot, he doesn't have to repeat Kiddush. And the second kos of Yayin will now be brought as a substitute, just stepping into the shoes of the first cup of Yayin. But I don't believe that the Taz would accept that analogy all the way, even as far as the Bori Pri HaGofen. Because in the case of Mayim, when he recited Bori Pri HaGofen, he clearly indicated that he wants his bracha to be chal on Yayin. And therefore the bracha wasn't chal on the Mayim. He made a mistake by holding on to the cup of water, but the bracha that he makes indicates that he wants the bracha of Bori Pri HaGofen to be on the Yayin. And the Yayin is right there in front of him, and therefore he doesn't need another Bori Pri HaGofen. But in the case of Nishpach, there, he clearly took a cup of Yayin. He wants his Bori Pri HaGofen to be chal on the Yayin. He picks up the kos, and now it's Nishpach. That's exactly equivalent to the case in the Shulchan Aruch that we discussed earlier, where he took that fruit. He has other fruit of the same species in front of him, but when he drops the fruit that he grabbed, he's going to have to make a new Bor Pri Eitz. And here too, when he drops the cup of wine that he grabbed onto his hand to make Kiddush on, you could bring him another kos of Yayin, but that's not going to salvage the Bori Pri HaGofen, because the Bori Pri HaGofen was already chal with his das on the first cup of wine. And therefore the analogy of the Taz between Mayim and Nishpach only goes that far as the Birchas HaKiddush is concerned. But if this is the case, it leads me to a problem. In the case of Nishpach, it's very nice that he can bring in another cup of wine because he has it available. Maybe he has a bottle of wine right there on the table, so he just simply pours in another cup because the first cup spilled. That's wonderful. And it's like that analogy to bring in a pitcher in the bullpen to replace the first pitcher. But in order to be Yotzei Yayin, the Rabbanan established that what you need is a cup of Kiddush. Now, what do I mean by a cup of Kiddush? That the Kiddush itself was on the Yayin. You can't just take a cup from your bottle and from your closet and say, well, that's a cup of Kiddush, and I'm going to drink it, and therefore I'm going to be Makayim the mitzvah d'Rabbanan of Kiddush al Yayin. He can't do that. So what I'm suggesting is, I don't get the Taz here. How can the Taz say that in Nishpach, he brings in another cup to replace the first cup? I don't understand the mechanism of it, because the second cup is not a kos Kiddush. He did not recite Kiddush on the second cup. And the Taz seems to be playing around with some sort of magical formula here, that the original Kiddush that he recited is now chal on the second cup. And the second cup could now replace the first cup, such that his original Kiddush can now be chal on the second cup. How does that work? And here I think the Taz quotes a Gemara, which, as I said to you before, is Chinese to us. Let's read it again. He says, Kulo navgi diber chasaninu. And I looked up that sugya. Remind me to tell you where it is. And the Gemara is talking about what's called a kos shel bracha. And the Gemara says that if he made his bracha on a cup of wine that was taken out of a barrel, they used to keep the wine in a barrel, and there was a spout to the barrel. He opened the spout, took out and filled a cup of wine, made his bracha. Then the Gemara says that to be Makayim the mitzvah of kos shel bracha, you could take additional wine from the chavis, from this barrel, and the wine in the barrel also becomes a kos shel bracha. So what I'm suggesting now is what we call tzvei dinim. There's one din of birchas hanenim, and for that the Taz is going to have to concede that the fact that I have another cup of wine handy, and after the first cup of wine on which I recited Bar Pri Hagafen and Kiddush spills, I can bring in that other cup of wine, that's not going to salvage his Bar Pri Hagafen. Because since he held on to the first kos of yayin, and then it spilled, in the analogy to the case in the Shulchan Aruch Reish Vav of the fruit that disappeared, as we called it, he's going to have to make another Bar Pri Hagafen. The Chiddush here, the Taz, is as far as the Birchas Kiddush is concerned. Because the Birchas Kiddush is not a Birchas Hanenim, but rather Birchas Shevach V'Odoya. It's a kos shel bracha. And now the Taz wants to suggest that the Kiddush that he recited on the first kos can be chal magically on the second kos that he brings in, through this principle that the kos shel bracha status will expand to include any yayin that is right there. So that the bracha is not chal on that particular yayin, but on the yayin in the chavis, in the original case in the Gemara, and in the Taz's frame of reference, on the kos yayin that he brings in from the bullpen to replace the kos yayin that was nishpach. And I'll be honest with you, Rabbosai, I don't know if the scenario that I'm about to describe is familiar to you. A man makes Kiddush on Friday night, and it seems to indicate in the Shulchan Aruch that everyone should drink from the kos Kiddush. Again, that's not critical, it's not indispensable, but it's l'chatchila. That's the way it should be done. Now, he's got the first choice is to take that cup of Kiddush and start pouring it into the various cups of the mesubin, those who are at the table. But what I'm describing now is a different scenario. Instead of going through the whole hassle of pouring from his cup into the smaller cups of each person at the table, what he does is he has a bottle of wine on the table and he passes it around. Pass the bottle. And everybody takes yayin from the bottle. I don't know if you ever saw such a thing. I once saw such a thing, and in my, I didn't say it out loud, but to myself I said, Amaratzis. This is ignorance. The kiyum of shtia for everyone at the table is from the kos shel Kiddush, not from a different source of yain. But now today I'm a little bit smarter. Having learned this Taz, who quotes this sugya of Nagri de Birchasa, which means that now the yayin in the chavis is also considered kosher bracha, and the bracha is chal on all the yayin, including the yayin that's back in the barrel. I now think that we have a great solution to recite Kiddush and guarantee that everybody gets from the kos shel Kiddush, even though they're not drinking from that kos, but rather from the bottle that's on the table. Now, in contemporary terms, they came up with another solution to this problem. You don't have to take from the kos shel Kiddush and pour it into everybody's cup. They have this, I don't know what you call it. There's a fancy name for it, and you spend a couple of $100, and you buy this thing with the spouts, and it goes here, there. Forget about that. I don't know that I need that anymore. Again, I don't want to put anyone out of business here. They're selling these things, these contraptions for lots of money. And I've seen it in some of the fanciest houses. They have these very sophisticated stuff. Now they're made out of silver. Tomorrow they'll be made out of gold. And after that, they'll be made out of diamonds. But I don't need that. Again, I'm Polish. I'm not Hungarian. So maybe that's the explanation. But whatever it is, I think that we have another solution. We've got a bottle on the table, and the brach of Kiddush is chal, not only the yayin in the kos, but even on the yayin in the bottle. And now all we have to do is divvy it up. And I'll tell you, if you want to be a rich guy, okay, so you get small bottles for each one of the guys at the table. You make Kiddush on your cup, and everybody drinks from their small bottle that's on the table. And I'll tell you the truth, this will solve another problem. I'm just joking with you a little bit, but I happen to like a certain kind of wine. And the guys at the table, they want grape juice. So now I have a solution to that problem. Again, I'm assuming grape juice has the din of yayin. I don't know. You have to check or Moshe Feinstein has juvas about this. But if you assume that the grape juice has the status of yayin, the grape juice is on the table, and the kiddush is now chal as a kosher bracha on every single grape juice that's on the table. So the members of the family, they don't have to suffer and drink my dry wine or semi-dry wine, whatever the heck I like to drink. It's on the table. So again, I want to just repeat for myself. I know you got it on the first round. A tzvei dinim here in this Taz. The Taz on the one hand, in the case of Yayin, says that since he has in the case of Mayim, I meant to say, since he has the yayin right there on the table, then he solves two problems, and he avoids having to repeat the Bar Priya Gofen, and avoids having to repeat the Birchas HaKiddush. Simply, everything is chal on the yayin that's munach lefana. However, in the analogous case of Nishpach, there the Taz makes a distinction. As far as the Bar Priya Gofen is concerned, You can bring another kos of yayin, it's not going to help you. You can't salvage the bar pri hagafen because of nishpach. Because since he grabbed the first kos and he was nishpach, that's equivalent to the case of a fruit which fell on the floor. So that bracha of bar pri hagafen cannot be salvaged. It's gone. He's going to have to make another bar pri hagafen. But there's another din as far as birchas hakiddush is concerned. And magically, he could bring in the other kos of yayin, like the pitcher from the bullpen, and it replaces the kos of yayin that was nishpach. And now his birchas hakiddush magically is chal on the second kos of yayin that he brings into substitute for the first. And that the Taz is relying or standing on the shoulders of a sugya of nagrasa de birchasa, which means that the kos shel bracha is not just the kos on which he recited the bracha, but on any yayin in the chavis that's right there. Tzvei dinim. One din in birchas hanen and bar pri hagafen, and another din in the bracha of Kiddush. I don't know, Rabbi Osa, if you're following me, but for me, this is me'ein olam haba. That God gives us an opportunity to experience the next world in this world. Yeah, Joe?
Just I wanted to confirm that when you say the guy who's making the Kiddush, does he not have to have a certain amount of kavana for all the wine that's there?
Could be. That's a good, very valid point. In other words, what we're saying is that the bracha of Kiddush is now chal on all the wine. Maybe, as Joe points out very well, he has to have in mind that there's more wine available, within a certain radius, such that his bracha could now spread its wings and encompass more yayin than the yayin that's in the kos. Could be. I don't know. That requires a lot more research, which I'd have to try to get to do. Now, I want to read the Taz carefully. And you're the jury here. I want to raise a question on the Taz, which I ran by my chevrusa, Alan Yehuda Dubin, and he was not impressed with my question. But honestly, I'm impressed with this question. The Taz in his original position that you don't have to repeat the Kiddush if he has available a koshel yayin, he recited Kiddush on a koshel mayin. The Taz writes, and I quote, Eino tzorech lachzor ulekadesh. And then he writes, V'im yivarech shenis birchas hakiddush yesh chashash bracha levatol. Now wait a second. I don't get it. The Taz originally presented his shita that you don't repeat the Kiddush a second time. So why does he use the language Eino tzorech lachzor ulekadesh? He doesn't need to make a second Kiddush. Now, Rabbi Osai, I'm going to give you two sentences, two formulations. Tell me if they're equal. You don't have to do something. You're not allowed to do something. Are those equivalent? Not at all. Because if I tell you you don't have to do it, it means if you want it, the ball is in your court. Go ahead and do it. The ball's in your court. You have the opportunity. You have the choice. But if I tell you you're not allowed to do it, that's a whole different story. Like, for example, in Keep It Av Ha'em, a parent could say to a child, you don't have to do something for me. You need not bring me a cup of tea. I'll do it myself, or whatever it might be. Or a parent could say, don't bring me a cup of tea. I don't want a cup of tea. It's just going to clutter up this, and it's going to fall and spill and so forth and so on. Now, if the Taz has come to the conclusion in his original position that once he was Yotzei Kiddush D'Oraisa with Amiras Dvarim on the Kosh Shel Mayim, then the Rabbanon are not going to require a brand new Kiddush Al Yayin, because the Rabbanon established Yayin as an attachment to the Kiddush D'Oraisa. So if you do everything in one fell swoop, fine. But if you've already fulfilled, according to Taz's original logic, your mitzvah D'Oraisa of Zochres Yom Shabbos Akadsho, and you had Kiddush, the Rabbanan are not going to come along and say, well, we want a new Kiddush. There ain't no such thing, because the Rabbanan only wanted to attach their Kiddush Al Yayin to the original Kiddush. We've discussed this in the past. Why then does the Taz write, Eino tzarich lachzor ulekadesh? What do you mean, Eino tzarich? When it comes to brachos, I'm having a little bit of deja vu. I had this argument with my father-in-law, may rest in peace. My shver, his name was Chaim Schleifrig. He used to make a birchas haderech, a tefillah derech, which ends with Baruch Atah Hashem Shomei Tefillah, whenever he drove a car in New York. And on a psychological level, I understood it very well. Wherever you drive in New York, it's Pashut Pikuach Nefesh. You need a tefillah haderech for any number of reasons. I think I once told you the story. I was backing into a parking spot on Grand Street in Manhattan. And this woman comes by with her car. Apparently she didn't like the fact that it was taking me a little too long to back into the spot, rolls down the window and yells out, "Dirty Jew, go back to the showers." This is in Manhattan in New York. I'm telling you a story from 25 years ago. By the way, because Rev Gershon is here and I wish him well, I have to say that the situation in California is not that much better. And since Joe and maybe Bobby and David are here, I don't know, the kotel of David is here, I have to tell you the situation in Canada is not so much better. But this happened to me in the Heilig of Manhattan on Grand Street, a major boulevard, 25 years ago. Jew, go back to the showers. So anyway, my father-in-law used to make a birchas hatfilah, tfilas haderech, whenever he took his car out to a trip in New York. Excuse me for just 1 second. Shalom Aleichem. Can I call you back in a few minutes? I'm giving shia now. Okay, thank you so much. Call too. Why do I tell you this story about my shver? Why was I upset as a Kalto Litvak? Because we don't add brachos. You don't say Baruch Atah Hashem unless you have to do so. If you're obligated, nicha. If you're not obligated, there's no optional brachos here. You can't just wake up one morning and say, "Oh, I'm gonna add some brachos." Doesn't work like that. And that's the basis for Suffolk brachos lahakil. As Rabbi Weber would say, sabah.
When you say bracha for traveling, you don't have to use Hashem's name.
Well, it does end with Baruch Atah Hashem Shomei Tefillah. Now, it's true, Gershon, there's a way of integrating it into the last bracha of the Emtzayos in the middle of Shmon Esrei. And that's what the Torah advocates. I try to fulfill that also. But let's say, you don't have that option. You're going to end up with Baruch Atah Hashem Shomei Tefillah. And that's a Nusach HaBracha. I don't know if you could just optionally, decide, oh, you're in the mood. So therefore, I come back to my objection, if you will, to the Taz's language here. And the Taz says, you know what? To recite Birchas HaKiddush a second time is a chashash bracha levatol. What does he use the word chashash? It's not a chashash bracha levatol. It's vaday bracha levatol. Because the Rabbanan never established a Birchas HaKiddush once you fulfill the mitzvah d'oraisa. It's either all together as one, or it's not at all. Again, I don't know if I've convinced you that there's a problem here. I did not convince my chavrusa, but maybe you gentlemen are more on my side. I don't know. Should we take a quick vote? Well, anyone who thinks that my kasha is a kasha, my diuk in the Lashon Taz is correct, raise your hand. Nobody raised their hand. Okay, so I'm the only one here who thinks that this is a problem. But let me just tell you what thought crossed my mind. The Taz understands, on the one hand, that you can bring in a pitcher from the bullpen, who's on the on-deck circle, so to speak, and he could fit into the shoes, and you could bring in a cup of wine and have that cup of wine fill in for the Kiddush. On the other hand, the Taz says, if you have no other cup of wine available right now in close proximity, then you yotze Kiddush d'oraisa with Amiras Dvarim al Kos Mayim, or before it was Nishpach, and that's it. The Rabbanan are not going to require another Kiddush. However, we have not fulfilled the Takonas Chachamim Kihilchasa, the way it was meant to be fulfilled, no matter what we do over here. Even if we bring another cup of wine in, there was a hefsek here. I call it a chatzitza. There's something that severed the connection, the flow between my original Kiddush and the new cup of wine. So I'm not really doing it the way that the Rabbanan established it, that the Amiras Dvarim of Kiddush d'oraisa should be immediately chal on the kos of yayin. I'm going to have to do a kumvaseh, get out of my chair, and get myself another cup of wine. So although halachically it could work, it's not the lechatchil, it's not the perfect ideal approach. And how much more so if I don't have another cup of wine and now I have to go to my neighbor and borrow wine, for sure I have completely blown it as far as the takonis chachamim of Kiddush al Yayin. So the Taz came up with a middle-of-the-road formula in which he offers you an optional bracha. And he says to you the following, you know what? You can get away with it as is. You can fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush, glat, you're okay, you're kosher, v'yosher, and that's fine. But if you are so motivated, what word should I use? So inclined, like the pasuk says at the beginning of Parshas Truma regarding, collecting for the Mishkan, it says, Ish asher yidvenu libo, his heart prompts him. He really wants to do and fulfill the takonis chachamim kilchasa the way the chachamim wanted it. He wants to make a Kiddush al yayin. So the Taz implies that he has the right to say, I don't want the first Kiddush. Let it go. I want to start from scratch. Remember the Etch-a-Sketch? Remember? We're going to start from scratch. We're going to make a Kiddush al yayin without any hefsekos, without any dilly-dallying, without any waiting for another cup of wine to substitute for the first one and all that, and I'll think. Now, is there such a thing, this is what bothered my mind, in the world, the universe of halacha, of a voluntary bracha? Could there be such a thing? So I did a little research and I found one case. I'd like to find more, but I didn't find any more. And in one circumstance, the halacha is flexible and offers you an opportunity to voluntarily recite a bracha. Let me see if I could read to you, the text here. Okay. This is a Gemara that's quoted by the Beis Yosef in Orach Chaim Simon Reish Chaf Hey, a sugya deep into Masechta Eruvin on Daf Mem Amud Beis. Omar Rabba, and with this we'll conclude for today. Ki havina bei Rav Huna iboy ma'u lomer zman b'Rosh Hashanah u'b'Yom Kippur. Do we recite Shechiyanu on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? Amalei, he responds, Rishus lo kami boile. Permission? You want to get the okay from me? The green light? Go ahead and make the bracha. But ki kami boile chovamai. Is there an obligation to recite Shechiyanu on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? And the Gemara says, "My mashma mehasam shebircha Shechiyanu al pri hamischadesh eino chova el rishus." Shulchan Aruch says that if you get a new fruit that hasn't been around on the market, I mean, that's hard to find in Canada. I remember in Canada, like all the fruits were there the whole year round. But in other places in the world, there are seasonal fruits. If you find a fruit for the first time on that new season, you haven't seen it, you haven't tasted it, that ein al chova el rishus. It's up to you. The ball is in your court, whether you're going to make a shechiyon. Again, Rabbi say, don't rely on this lahalocha. I'm not paskening. But the Gemara seems to have a principle in Birchas Shevach V'Odaya that when you thank Hashem, it depends upon how you feel about it. Are you excited about it? My wife brings home a star fruit or something. I don't know what. They have these crazy fruits. They're not very nice and very pretty and aesthetically appealing, but honestly, I'm not excited about it. It doesn't resonate, doesn't speak to me. I don't even like the taste of it so much. It's a nice new fruit. Of course, you buy them money. They import it from China, where they get it from Spain. So it could be that the Taz maintains that Birchas HaKiddush was formulated by the Rabbanan like any Birchas Shevach Modaya with a caveat, a condition that maybe you could go beyond the letter of the law without a chova and recite the bracha as a rishus. Now, I'll just end with the following point. There's a machlokas, as you know, whether or not we recite a bracha on Halil on Rosh Chodesh. Rabbeinu Tam says yes, and that's the beginning in Ashkenaz. And the Machaber Paskins, based on the Rambam and others, no, we don't make a bracha on Rosh Chodesh because it's only a minhag. And I have to tell you, I have roots in Lubavitch. My father was 7 generations Chabad. And the Alter Rebbe of Chabad, the first Rebbe, sometimes would recite a bracha on Hal on Rosh Chodesh. Other times he didn't recite it. Now, I don't know if what I'm telling you is true, but the legend has it that they asked the Alter Rebbe, do we paskin this way or do we paskin that way? And his response was in Yiddish, And he said, when it's haltzitzach in lemon, if it's hallel, if I hear, a hallel in my heart, meaning I'm in a very joyous mood, I'll make a bracha. And I only mention this in closing because I think there might be room in a birchas shevach v'odoya, not in a birchas hatfilah, not in a birchas hanedim, but a birchas shevach v'odoya, to allow for a reshus that becomes a personal decision on the part of every individual. Adkan. Thank you so much, and we should only hear better news. And the Nisim and Iflal is going on. We're living through an unbelievable period, but at the same time, we'd like to get a night's sleep.